Think about the crisis. Hong Kong's been going through crisis now for about 10 or 11 months. How have we as leaders, how have we as schools responded to this? Because we're told by the literature, we're told by many others, that good leaders are actually forged in a crisis. Forged in a crisis means that they're made, they're hammered into shape, they're bent and put back together in different ways. Others say that it's really only in a crisis that we learn about ourselves and we learn about ourselves as leaders. Crisis shapes us. And often, the good leaders come out the other end of a crisis different. Better, hopefully, better leaders. And great leaders come out both better people and better leaders. So what we're going to do today is just talk a little bit about leadership in crisis or crisis in leaderships in Hong Kong. We just talked a little bit about how we are forged in crisis, we're made in crisis, it tells us about ourselves. And then we'll have a look at the tensions of crisis. The tensions are what actually forges. We have to manage these tensions. We can't actually solve them. They help the form. Then I'm going to tell you a few of the different leader forms that I have seen. And let's make it straight out here. We are not just talking about school principals. We are talking about all leaders, the density of leaders within our schools and our community. Then we'll just have a little bit of a look at what the more successful leaders in crisis tend to do or tend to be. I'll show you one little bit from a study, and then I'll give you a couple of my observations through the crisis, and we'll finish with some questions. So first of all, let's have a look at some of the tensions. I'm not going to do them all. Being forged in crisis means facing, confronting, managing and working through the tensions that we feel as leaders. Here are some that I felt as I went through the crisis. Number one, managing normality while managing disruption. It was incredibly disrupted, it still is. But at the same time, the people who work with us, who work for us, they need some normality. They need to know that we're there. They need some security. So as leaders tussle with this, of course they need to manage the chaos that comes with the disruption, but they also have to make a sense of normality and reasonableness and sensibleness for the people that they work with. Another tension is that when we have to deal with what's going on, for example in Hong Kong, having to slip to online or whatever, we are actually pushing people to innovate. We're pushing innovation throughout our organisations, but at the same time, we are searching for a coherence across our innovation. We can't just have every little thing popping up in the school without tying it back to the purpose of our school. So how do we get that coherence? How do we care for people while maintaining standards? I found this really tough. I really wanted people to be looked after. I knew they were suffering psychologically, mentally, they were really thrown out. And our first job was care for them, make sure they're okay. But as leaders, we're also responsible for standards. A crisis is not really an excuse for letting standards of everything we do drop. Most of our staff working at home, how do we maintain a standard when that happens? And the final tension, for me at least, was trying to act like I was in control. Because people looked at the leader, they expect them to be strong, they expect them to be in control. But really inside, I didn't have a lot of control, and I had no control over what was going on in terms of the crisis. These tensions help to forge us. Now, my observation, and you'll have your own, is that we saw different forms of leaders associated or emerge with this crisis. And here's just a run of what I think we had. The first sort of type that we had were the deniers. No, it's not happening, it's not going on, it's all going to be all right, nothing's going to happen. Fine. But if you deny the crisis, if you deny the urgency, it's unlikely you'll be able to act. Then we had, and we won't do detail here, the freezers, the speedsters, you know, the one that just rushed ahead blindly to do things, the perfectionists, the focused, or those that were focused on the short term, we had the visionaries, and then we had the type of leaders, I think, that seemed to make the most difference. Those that seemed to be able to be forged and forged. The pragmatic visionaries. Those that could look ahead to what a better place might be when this was over, but do it pragmatically, not make it a pie in the sky or an unachievable dream. They had a vision for what was better, but they were pragmatic, they were practical about it. Now, a pragmatic visionary does things like this. These are types of their behaviours. As they go through the crisis, they acknowledge people's fears and they encourage resolve. So they don't deny what's going on. They say, yes, we know this is a problem, but we have to work together to resolve and be strong with that. Really importantly, they give people a role and purpose. And this word purpose will come up again and again and again with successful leaders through crisis. What's their role? What's our role in my department? What's my role in my school? What is our purpose for doing this? They also emphasise experimentation and learning. We got to keep learning. We have to keep learning different ways through taking risks. We've got to experiment. So purposeful visionaries were the sort of people that emphasised this. And they tended to energy and emotion. To yours, that's our staffs and our people around us, and our own. I don't know about you, but throughout this whole thing, when I get home at night, 8 or 9 o'clock, I tell you, I'm gone. My energy's gone, my emotion's gone. I have to try and attend to myself, another tension, but really we're attending to our students and we're attending to our staff. Now, what I noticed, so we're back to what I've noticed now, is that the more successful leaders had a short and a future-pointed purpose. In other words, they knew what was needed to get through this emergency, this crisis, and they worked at that. But at the same time, they kept their mind on the future. What will we take with us from this? What do we want to be like when we come out of it? What do I want to be like when I come out of it? So they had a short and a future-oriented purpose. Now, really importantly, and I believe this is the most important thing, they had a really strong values platform. They built a stability platform for their staff, for their students. That is what sustained them. Because when we're working in an uncertain crisis situation, it is only our values and our beliefs that guide what we do. Incredibly important. And they used that to ply that into a set of simple rules and prioritisation. They stayed ahead, but they became one of many. With this, they stayed the leader, the head of department, the vice principal, the supervisor, whatever it is. But they understood that they couldn't just do it on their own. There was a whole community of leaders and supporters and innovators, from the children in P3 to the children in Secondary 3 to the people working in our offices. We became one of many. The others had ideas equal to ours because we were no more familiar with the situation than them. But you still had to be strong because your people, your staff and students wanted to see that. And of course, they maintained humility. They didn't know it all. They tried to keep up energy. They provided people with hope. And frankly, they were quite tough to try and get through it. When we finish this, as we go through a crisis, and I don't believe we stopped and thought about this after our crisis last year, our social movement, we've got to intentionally ask ourselves a set of questions. From before in my school, what will I rebuild when the crisis starts to get clearer? What will I lock back in? In other words, what will I lock in that I already had that is important to keep? What will I reboot? What do I need to reboot, refresh, in line with what I learned with the crisis? And what do I boot out? What do I get rid of? What do I decide, or I found out, I don't really need? Then I will ask, how have I changed? How have I improved? How have I been forged by this crisis? The next intentional question is I'll have to work out, how do I reconnect relationships? Although we now have our online and digital relationships, how do I connect with the humans and the people and the students on that level that's so important for a school? We run on relationships. We thrive on relationships. We need relationships. How am I going to reconnect that? And that ties back to the last question I'll ask myself, and that is, what is the first thing that I'll do on that first semester? I don't know when it's going to be, when we come out of the crisis and we're going back and we're discovering the new formal. What's the first thing you're going to do as a leader? So I'd just like to finish with a quote from Cohen, because I think this really sums up the theme of what we're talking. And she says, we, all of us leaders, not principals, all of us as leaders, will be remembered for how we manage ourselves and others through this crisis. How will you, your team, your school, your society connect, persevere and progress? And how will we emerge from this experience collectively stronger, personally stronger, and stronger as a group that promotes the education and the best what we can for our children? So, leadership in crisis, how is it forging you?